hospital romances aren't actually real because hospitals are very sad places and they're very depressing, but I think that's why there are all these love stories coming from them. Hey, it's Zadie and you're watching Flytte Kartina. I've been going very slowly these past few weeks, and I thank you all for being very patient with me and kind with how I've been doing things. So today I'm going to be reviewing the movie 5 Feet Apart, which is about two kids with illnesses that they can't be near each other, otherwise they would die, and nothing sparks a romance like distance. Am I right, guys? For everybody here who is not a continuous viewer, I am going to go over, like, you know, two basic things in two halves of the video. The first half is going to be dedicated to the rating and me explaining the rating of the movie and basically what you're getting into when you are watching this movie. The second half of the video will be dedicated to my thoughts and opinions without spoiling the movie entirely. Let's start with the rating of this film and why it was rated that way. 5 Feet Apart is a film that is rated PG-13 by the MPAA. It's rated for thematic elements, language, and some suggestive material. Now that's broken down into 3 separate categories. Let me just explain to you how this movie used it, all these different categories in different ways. Thematic elements we described in video 1 of my channel, which you should never watch ever. Thematic elements are elements associated with this movie that may or may not be acceptable in this day and age. Thematic elements, say in like historical fiction movies, where they're like, oh yes, slavery is a thing and we are very racist and that's not really acceptable today. So we put thematic elements on the rating of the movie to prepare people for what they're going to see. Thematic elements in 5 Feet Apart is more like the scare factor that has to do with them being in close proximity with each other, and so you're just kind of like, you're going to die, stop it. There's also a scene where a patient gets an attack, and so they're, this movie is all about like lung diseases, and so this person starts coughing and hacking and doubling over and doing stuff like that. And so it's kind of a little bit scary for younger audiences. Next, we're going to move on to the language, and the language wasn't super bad, it just was always there, and it was more definite and defined. It wasn't like just a little thing that you mutter under your breath. It was more like a thing that you just yelled out loud. If that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm moving on. Suggestive material is next. I am going to say this is more than suggestive material as the material suggests. This part of the rating is very, very vague, and that's what you don't know going into it, and you're just kind of like, suggestive material, that just means they're just gonna allude to something, right? They're not actually gonna show it. Well, you're wrong. The suggestive material in this context is like being almost nude. These two characters decide, hey, let's show our vulnerability by actually being, almost completely naked. So there's a pool scene, and you all know what happens with pool scenes. They just decide, oh, this will be much easier if I just take off all articles of clothing except for the undergarments. And there's a couple of other scenes where somebody is changing and, it's a medical drama romance thing that happens, so it's visually impactful, but it's not always necessary. But this movie used it anyway. So there's this girl and she has scars from various surgeries, so they decide to show those scars. And I've talked too much about the suggestive material, so I'm going to move on to the frequency chart, which I'm going to pull up right here. It's at the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to rate this movie on a scale of 1 to 10 on how frequent these elements that I just described to you are in this film. So in 5 Feet Apart, I'm saying the elements were probably 8.5. That's how frequent they are in terms on a scale of 1 to 10. That's an 8.5, whatever. I don't have half markers in this scale that I need to fix. So lastly, for this first part of the video, I'm going to rate this movie on a scale on my magical scale of movies, where I rate a movie from Steamboat Willie to Deadpool on how appropriate this is for younger audiences. And when I mean younger audiences, I mean people who are younger, like children and stuff like that, and teenagers. Like, teenagers are young people and need to be protected. So on my magical scale of movies, I'm gonna rate 5 Feet Apart a 6 on the magical scale of movies, which is The Help. And what that means is, if you know what the elements are in The Help and how they're exemplified and personified and used and how frequent they are and how obvious they are, then you'll know what it's like in 5 Feet Apart in a very basic sense. If you don't know what I mean by that, watch some of my previous videos and subscribe to my channel so that I can. So we've gotten the rating out of the way. Let's move on into the actual nitty-gritty part of this, where I'm gonna voice my opinions about this movie and how much I liked it or how much I disliked it. 5 Feet Apart has this kind of basic storyline. These people who love each other can't be with each other, and so it's just kind of like you're like you should be together, but you shouldn't. You actually shouldn't. You're going to die because life is precious. Overall, I think this movie was well done. It had all of the elements and, you know, plot devices that were used, and it's just kind of like, yeah, it was a good, entertaining movie, and I really felt emotions from it. There's a couple of scenes where I'm like, yes, those are really good points to make, and I haven't seen it done this way in another movie like it, so, you know, it's great. I love it. Some of the angles that they use in this movie are really nicely done, and they're just, you know, good camera angles that are done cheaply. Like, you didn't need a rig with a track and like a 360-degree camera to film this shot, so it's great. One thing that I did enjoy about this movie was that you cared about each and every one of these characters, even the minor characters, and it's just like this movie had heart to it. Now, about the characters, some of the characters that I was like, why are you even here, were the parents. There's this one character who goes like, he introduces himself and he's like, yeah, my mom, he's talking about his parents, my parents are divorced, but my mom is really dedicated to me, so she can't focus on her own life. And then it's like a big event in his life and it's a big moment and she's not there. It's like, well, if you really cared about your son, then would you actually be, you know, would you actually be there? Wouldn't you actually be there for that kind of thing? And then there's a scene where both sets of parents show up and they're like starting to care all of a sudden. I'm like, just like, where were you before this? All of a sudden we just suddenly care. But I did enjoy this movie, and I think overall it was well done, and it had elements in it that were very good and very weak about it. So just like every other average movie. So if I had to buy this movie, rent this movie, or see it in theaters, I would probably buy it or rent it, but I'm more on the renting side. Question of the week for you guys is a little bit more serious. Do you know anybody who has been diagnosed with a chronic illness of any sort? Like, it could be something as little as like, I don't know what I'm saying. Do you have anybody in your life who is currently suffering? And let me know what they are so that I can, you know, be thinking of them. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always. Have a great random Thursday. We'll see you on the other side of the screen. Bye!